Hear me? Okay. Anyway, it is Tuesday, May 9th, a little after 6. I want to welcome all of you to the first hearing of the Ad Hoc Committee on Police Reform. And I want to thank you in advance for taking time out from your schedule to come here and be with us this evening. To my right is Mr. Paul Koretz, who chairs the Committee on Personnel. To my left is Mr. Englander, who chairs Public Safety. Hopefully, Mr. Marquise Harris Dawson will join us a little later. And so at this point, we only have 4 people on the committee. I'm optimistic that I'll appoint another person after the May 16th election when we have another council person. I want to assure all of you that are here that this is not a one-time meeting, that this is the beginning of a conversation that I hope we can continue to have. What I wanted to try to create was an atmosphere where the residents of this city could feel comfortable in coming and speaking their mind on whatever subject it is where it relates to the Los Angeles Police Department. What I'd like to hear are concerns, complaints, but more importantly, suggestions and recommendations, things that we can do better. We are the government, and I think the government has a responsibility to try to make things better for you in the city. And the only way we can make things better is in an attempt for us to try to work together. So I want everybody here to feel comfortable when you come to the mic. I'm going to be calling folk from the audience. If you fill out a card and you'd like to speak, we'll take as many speakers as possible. And you might even be able to get to speak twice. So if you fill out a card and you feel as though you have something else to say, fill out another card. And I'm going to try to get to everybody. But today I have invited a panel of folk. Sergeant, I'd like for you to let them come in and sit at the center table. So if the Karen, are you it? No, that's the doctor. Is Mr. White? Please come and take a seat. Okay, we may have to share microphones. So I don't have a real set, structured program or approach. I'd like for this to be a pretty freewheeling conversation, but I think what we want to start out with is if I could have the 3 of you begin and identify yourself, maybe give us a little bit on the organization that you represent. You may want to share your opinion where it relates to the Measure C Board of Rights. But I'm also hoping that this is the beginning of an expanded conversation. But a lot of that depends on you. Then if it's okay, I want to ask questions and things of that nature. So if you could maybe speak for a few minutes, and I don't want to put a time restriction on you guys because you are it. You are tonight's panel. So that, and then I may interrupt from time to time to take a card from the folk in the audience. So any questions for me before we start?
No, I think we're clear. Thank you.
Okay, who wants to start off?
So I'll start. My name is Karen Lane. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Programs at Community Coalition. Community Coalition is a community-based organization in South Los Angeles. We were founded in 1990 during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic, and we continue to organize both everyday residents as well as social service providers in South Los Angeles. So I'm going to start just giving some context, and each of the organizations that were invited here today have a few remarks in addition to introducing their panel, their organization. And so, as you mentioned, this hearing and ad hoc committee really came about after a public debate around Measure C and proposed reforms to the Police Board of Rights process. The question before us tonight, though, is not whether civilians should play a role in the oversight of the Los Angeles Police Department. We collectively agree that everyday residents must play an active role in holding the police department and the city accountable for police practices in the city of Los Angeles. 25 years after the civil unrest in Los Angeles, it is critical for us to take an examination of policing, the state of police-community relations, and the city's investments in public safety strategies that do not rely on suppression and incarceration. We are greatly disappointed that police reform and public spending on public safety remain a two-way conversation between the city and the Police Protective League. It is time that we put public back in public safety. There is no greater threat to public safety than the community's mistrust of the police department and the justice system. In a recent poll of about 5,000 residents in council districts 8, 9, and 10 conducted by Community Coalition, the preliminary data shows that 82% of those who were polled believe that police officers get away with misconduct. Similarly, in a report commissioned by the LAPD Police Commission, that report found that 60% of black residents in Los Angeles polled disagreed with the statement that LAPD officers treat all races fairly. This perception is grounded in real-life experiences. In the report by the Inspector General, between 2012 and 2014, LAPD did not uphold any of the 1,356 allegations of racial profiling. That trend continued in 2016, where 0 complaints of racial profiling were made in the first 6 months, were actually sustained. Moreover, as we have seen repeatedly on television and social media, the number of police-involved shootings in Los Angeles, very few are held to be outside of policy. LAPD's disciplinary process lacks transparency and falls short of holding officers who commit misconduct accountable. The police union and individual LAPD police commissioners complain that the existing disciplinary process is demoralizing to police officers. As a result, the union has honed in on the Board of Rights process in an effort to increase the power of officers who have already been found guilty of misconduct by LAPD leadership. Again, emphasizing officers who leadership within LAPD has found has acted outside of policy and that should be has been recommended for either termination or suspension. The union has decided to put their efforts into increasing those officers' control and power to control if and how they are disciplined. We believe that this is misguided and deepens the community's mistrust of the department, which is a disservice not only to everyday residents, but police officers as well. This is why the 4 organizations before you and over 24 other community and labor organizations oppose Measure C and call for comprehensive reform that is informed by community members, experts in the field, department leadership, advocates, and stakeholders throughout the city. Tonight, we hope to start conversations that we must be clear about we believe should have happened before the City Council approved Measure C to go on the ballot. But first, we hope to provide historical context about the evolution of the Board of Rights process and reforms following the civil unrest. Next, we will outline specific critiques of the Board of Rights process that jeopardize accountability. And finally, we want to take this opportunity to fully discuss our concerns about Measure C and the consequences of passing this measure to both public trust and safety in Los Angeles.
Okay, next.
So my name is Pete White with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, based in downtown Los Angeles, but working through downtown Los Angeles and South Central Los Angeles. Strategically, our work falls in three buckets. Community organizing, because we believe we need to build the power to stop measures like Measure C from moving forward. Community service, ensuring that we can provide legal services for those who are caught up in the web of policing, and the web of policing creates a blockade to services and housing. And then the last piece, community improvement, because we believe that we are well-heeled to put in the resources necessary to improve our communities. We believe that we have to reimagine public safety, and that means a deep investment in those things that make us safe. I must confess, preparation for tonight's hearing was most difficult, but not for the reasons you might expect. I'm very clear on context and well prepared to debate content, although very little debate is actually necessary. Preparation has been difficult because editorial after editorial and story after story paints a very vivid picture of how those that look like us and come from us do not side with us. A conversation that does not begin with us being locked out of the dialogue, that would be too much like right. No, how we are not even considered. How at the height of a movement to recognize that Black Lives Matter, our elected officials would be engaged in negotiations with the Los Angeles Police Protective League at fancy restaurants, no doubt, that would ultimately devalue Black life and place us at greater risk. Let me be clear that any conversation on police reform must begin and end with those most impacted by the issues on a daily and hourly basis. Any move towards policies to stop the well-documented trauma happening in our communities at the hands of the LAPD must be established and vetted by those who have carried the burden and fought on the front lines to rein in this department. But it is clear that this did not happen. The irony is thick. We commemorate the 1992 rebellion, the seating of the Christopher Commission, which in part created Charter Amendment F, which changed the composition of the Board of Rights panel from 3 command staff to 2 command staff and 1 civilian. That after the thunderous applause of civil rights organizations, politicians, religious leaders, and many others, and after the flash of the news cameras went dim, no one monitored the changes, if any the amendment would have. Fast forward 25 years, and as a result of Charter Amendment C, the evidence lays bare for all to see. Without Charter Amendment C, we would not know the LAPD officers found guilty of misconduct already take part in choosing the panel that will ultimately be used to decide their fate. We would not know that there is a 7-year administrative experience requirement for those outside of the department wishing to serve on this panel. We would not know the extent to which this hand-picked and curated panel would vote to lessen punishment instead of hold officers accountable. We would not know that the whole process is secretive and held by the Police Commission President Richard T. Fink to decide who stays and who leaves. We would not know how unfairly stacked the deck is for those of us in the community seeking justice. We would not know that taxpayers have paid $81 million in the past year in LAPD lawsuits, and that from 2012 to 2016, we have spent $196 million in civil rights lawsuit payouts, not including attorney's fees. We know that none of this makes us safe, and that as we reimagine public safety, an immediate divestment from LAPD resources and an investment toward things like housing, parks, community-based violence intervention, etc., are the only pathways to our safety.
Next.
So, my name is Jordan Greenslade. I was a recent student at Occidental College where I wrote my senior thesis on the Los Angeles Police Protective League. And I hope to provide a little context about the police union's role in supporting this charter amendment that we're talking about right now. The title of my paper was, "We Are Getting Our Asses Kicked. We Got to Speak the Language of Reform. Police Unions in Crisis of Legitimacy." This title comes from a conversation I had with Bill Violante, who was on the board of directors of the Police Protective League in the early 1990s during the time of the Rodney King beating and subsequent acquittal. He realized that given the amount of criticism LAPD had begun to face, they needed to present themselves as a union more amenable to police reform in order to remain politically relevant. However, they kept this supposed shift in values confined to rhetoric and policies that would support their own interests. For instance, they supported efforts towards community policing initiatives because it would add many officers to their membership without fundamentally changing the day-to-day work of most officers. In addition, they eventually began to show support towards the Inspector General, who could launch independent investigations of the department because she would also level criticisms at Chief Park, who they bitterly opposed. However, far more insidious of these examples was the eventual embrace of civilians on the Board of Rights. While the League initially opposed the first edition of a civilian on Board of Rights through Charter Amendment F in 1992, they eventually came around to it. So what changed? I think a quote from an interview I had with Gary Fullerton, a director of the Police Protective League in the mid to late 90s, and since then a lawyer who represents LAPD officers in discipline hearings, is most telling. He explained to me, civilians have a tendency to look at it as civilians and look at it logically. A lot of them are lawyers. The fear that we, past league boards, had was that they would pick some old lady from Nickerson Gardens, from a housing project, and she would be totally unsophisticated and just go, I hate police. That didn't happen. One of the problems that we have with the civilians is that they get chosen by the police commission. But the police commission has kind of a secret process on who gets to be a hearing officer and who doesn't. And what we found is when you have a civilian sit on the Board of Rights, and if they're too vociferous in their objections to what the LAPD is doing, the police commission removes them from the list and keeps only the people that go with the flow. So obviously there's a lot to unpack with that quote. But I think what's most obvious is that their support for civilian review is very contingent on which civilians are allowed to participate in this process. It is reserved for a selected group of people who the league is confident will go with the flow, and if they don't, they'll be removed from the list. And that confidence is not misplaced, as league studies have shown that civilians are much more likely to side with the officer. It is a form of civilian review that is designed to exclude so many Los Angeles residents from the process, especially those most affected by police misconduct. Because it's important to be explicit and not dance around the racist undertones of whom Mr. Fullerton says he does not want to play a role in the Board of Rights. When Mr. Fullerton was on the league board, the residents of Nickerson Gardens, which was the housing project he mentioned, was about 95% black. So there should be no doubt that the person he was referring to, who he would not want to take part in the process, who he calls totally unsophisticated and not able to be impartial when it comes to policing, is someone who is black and low income. He wants people that are logical, but for the Police Protective League, logical means going with the flow and not being critical of police. It means coming from a very small pool of mostly lawyers, and quite frankly, to Mr. Fullerton, logical seems to exclude low-income black people. This is not the first time the League has used the language of reform to advance their interests, but is by far the most deceitful and hurtful instance to the residents of Los Angeles. True and transparent civilian oversight, where Angelenos of all backgrounds and experience have the opportunity to contribute, is something I'm strongly in favor of, but this is nothing of the sort. This amendment has one purpose only, to make it easier for police officers who commit wrongdoing.
I'm Melanie Ochoa. I'm staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California. So the Board of Rights is a central feature of an LAPD disciplinary process that fails to hold officers accountable and discourage misconduct. The Board of Rights functions as a disciplinary appeals board. Officers that the Chief of Police has already found guilty of serious misconduct and determined should be punished by suspension, demotion, or termination can challenge the discipline to the Board of Rights. But the board is a one-way ratchet. It can only confirm or lessen the punishment that the chief recommends. It cannot increase punishment that is too lenient and cannot impose punishment on officers that the chief has not already chosen to punish. The Board of Rights only exists to give officers accused of serious misconduct an opportunity to avoid punishment. It is not an element of civilian oversight intended to hold officers accountable and should not be painted as such. The persistent protests against Chief Beck by many of those in this room have focused on his failure to punish officers even for gross misconduct. There is already a high bar for LAPD officers to receive serious discipline, and yet this discipline is often undermined by the Board of Rights. According to the report prepared by the Chief Legislative Analyst at the behest of City Council, over the past 5 years, out of 229 cases heard by the board where the chief recommended that an officer be fired, the board only upheld that decision and fired the officer in less than half of the cases. In the majority of cases, the board allowed an officer found guilty of misconduct one that the chief believed should be removed from duty to remain on the streets. The composition of the Board of Rights is currently an issue before the voters, but in its current iteration, the board is comprised of 2 command-level LAPD officers and 1 civilian member. From what we know about the board, this civilian member is strategically selected to result in individuals that are most likely to be sympathetic to the officers challenging their discipline. The only real objective criteria for Board of Rights members is that they have the 7 years of experience in arbitration or similar work, an experience that excludes the majority of Los Angeles civilians, quite intentionally. The executive director of the LAPD Police Commission then individually selects civilians from the pool of applicants after a private interview based on unknown criteria. And as we have heard, individuals who fail to vote in favor of officers are removed from the pool of possible participants. And from this already favorable pool, the accused officer gets to participate in selecting which civilian panelists hear his appeal. When an officer appeals his discipline, the names of 3 civilian members are drawn, and the accused gets to strike a panelist that is not to his liking. With all of these structures operating to ensure that civilian panelists are sympathetic to officers, it is unsurprising that the civilians are the most lenient participants in the already lenient Board of Rights. The LAO reported that where there was a split decision in favor of reducing penalties, the civilian member voted for lower penalties every single time. The LA Times recently reported on cases in which the civilian was the lone voice voting to reduce penalties and was overruled by the officer members. The civilian member voted against the chief's recommendation of firing an officer who, quote, drew his weapon during a drunken spat at a fast food restaurant, and another who, quote, was found guilty of exposing himself and masturbating in public. Again, these are officers that the civilians believed should not receive the recommended discipline. The overall voting patterns, and these cases in particular, illustrate that the civilian board members are not merely overly sympathetic to officers forced to make split decisions under pressure. These selected civilians simply refuse to hold officers accountable, even when they commit serious criminal acts that were the direct product of their own poor decision-making. This sends a message to officers that even egregious conduct will not be punished. So not only does the Board of Rights ensure that officers who have already been found guilty of misconduct and deserving of termination return to the streets to continue to interact with the public, but it also ensures that other officers need not fear that their misconduct on or off the job can result in serious punishment. This failure in discipline puts Los Angeles citizens at risk when they encounter officers who have proven themselves unqualified for the serious responsibilities that come with the badge and the gun of the LAPD. And the costs are spread across Los Angelinos because we all bear the burden of paying for the substantial liabilities incurred by a police force that is incapable of holding itself in check by its existing leadership and disciplinary process. Indeed, just today, the LA Times ran another article citing the soaring costs of police misconduct and payouts that city residents have been forced to pay for officers' misconduct, including shootings of unarmed individuals and officers framing innocent people. None of these settlements has any impact on the officers' conduct because they are not made to pay for their own wrongdoing. We are, both as victims and as the parties responsible for making the victims whole. So while the existence, operation, and makeup of the Board of Rights already plays a key role in the breakdown of LAPD's disciplinary process, the current measure on the ballot, Charter Amendment C, threatens to make this already lax disciplinary process more lenient and exacerbate all of the problems I have just laid out.
Okay, could you give me your... Hold tight for a second, guys. Let me get your name again, and then I want your name again.
I'm sorry, Melanie Ochoa, and I'm with the ACLU.
Melanie. All right, and you again?
Jordan Greenslade, former student at Occidental College.
I got you, Jordan. Okay, doctor?
My name is Melina. I don't think this one's on. Yeah. Right, exactly. My name is Melina Abdullah, and I'm here as an organizer with Black Lives Matter. I'm also a professor and a mother, which is what motivates me to do this work, is that I have 3 children, and I want them to live and walk safely in the city that's supposed to be theirs. So when we think about Measure C, as my comrades have already lifted up, one of the most alarming things about Measure C is our Charter Amendment C, is that it was written by the Police Protective League. And we know that you know what that means, that the Police Protective League always does work that is in the best interest of their members, often at the expense of the community. So for this charter amendment to be written by them and said to have been walked over to elected officials' offices to be placed on the ballot should have raised antennas, should have sounded alarms, because we know that our community and the police are often in conflict with one another. At the very least, what I would think from one who is a leader is there would be an engagement with the community. There would be a conversation about what this charter amendment could mean. There would be an engagement with the 4 organizations here and the more than 70 organizations who have now signed on to the No on C campaign, right? We'd be talked to about what kind of reform would you like to see? What kind of changes would you like to see? And we would have shared those ideas with you rather than just placing what the Police Protective League wants for their members on the ballot. So for us, it feels like a backroom deal. It feels like we have a mayor who has ambitions for higher office and needs to have the nod of the police, who needs to be seen as a tough-on-crime candidate when he runs for governor or Senate, or now I think he's floating his own name as a presidential candidate for 2020, according to MSNBC. It also feels like a manipulation. It feels like a manipulation of the term civilian. It also feels like a manipulation or an attempt to manipulate the organizations that over the last several years have been pushing for changes in public safety, pushing for not only reform but a reimagining of public safety. So I know I myself was pulled by some folks to say, you've been chanting fire Beck. This is a referendum on Charlie Beck. So this is what you want, as if we're not going to actually read the charter amendment ourselves and say this is not what we want, and it was written by the Police Protective League, right? And so it feels like a manipulation. And then it also, I mean, and this is the second, I think, major point, is that this is a weakening of police discipline. And let me say that very clearly. This is a weakening of police discipline. And that was all articulated by my comrades here. It allows officers to choose their disciplinary body. If I were charged with a crime, I'd very much like to choose my own jury, right? This is essentially what this does. It leaves in place the current system that the very charter amendment claims to be problematic. It leaves that in place as an option, and then gives an additional option to officers who've already been found guilty of misconduct. More options for guilty officers. That is a weakening of police discipline. And then not that there is ever a time, but now is absolutely not the time to weaken police discipline. I'm sure you all are aware of the recent LMU study that shows that 60% of Angelenos believe that another mass uprising is inevitable in the near future, and among young people 18 to 29, 70% of Angelenos believe another mass uprising is inevitable. When we talk about that, when we think about the history, and this is my professor hat, every mass uprising has been rooted in police abuse of communities. So why would we want to pass something that weakens police discipline and makes police feel like they can do whatever they want and run amok in communities and no police discipline, no serious discipline will be enacted? An article in the LA Times today says that LAPD, or the LA Police Protective League, has spent $890,000 so far to pass Measure C, right? We don't have deep pockets. We don't have deep pockets. $890,000 is an absolute Goliath in our view, right? We don't have deep pockets, but we do have people power. If you look here, these are our folks. These are our folks. We all believe no on C, yes? We all believe no on C. This is people power in this room, not just turning out to your hearing, but turning out every single day to educate our community members about the manipulation that is on the ballot. We know that in most districts, nothing else is on the ballot except Charter Amendment C. And so it seems like another manipulation that you are relying on people not turning out to the polls on May 16th. But black people do vote. And actually, black people vote in higher numbers than almost any other group, right? And I'm saying black people as the people who are most impacted by police violence, right? And so we are going to turn out, right? Yes, and we're going to turn out and vote no on C. I also want to point to that LA Times article, President Wesson, when you said that if you could, you would have done it differently. I want to lift up, because my area of research is black organizing, black community organizing, black leadership, right? And I study leadership generally. My dissertation was on leadership. My PhD is in political science. One of the marks of a great leader is their ability to evolve, right? So we know that you carried this and you put this on the ballot and you were able to win over the support of your colleagues on city council. You always have an opportunity to change. You always have an opportunity to shift your position, and I asked you about that a couple weeks ago. You have an opportunity to say, maybe I was mistaken to put this on the ballot without first engaging in a community process. Maybe I shouldn't be carrying the water of the Police Protective League. Maybe I should listen when people say that there is going to be a mass uprising right here if something different is not done. So we are inviting you to switch sides. We acknowledge that we are Davids and the Police Protective League is an absolute Goliath. But guess who won that battle? Guess who won that battle? David won. So be a David. Be a David. So 70 plus organizations, from the ACLU to Democratic clubs to Community Coalition to Scope to classroom teachers to religious organizations like PICO and LA Voice to pretty much every progressive organization, and all of these leaders here say vote no on C, and we are encouraging all of you to not be on the wrong side of history, because that's where you stand right now. No on Measure C.
Okay. All right. So what we're going to do now, if it's okay with the panel, I'm going to call up some of the folk from the public that submitted cards to speak. Let them speak, and then we'll have some other questions for you guys. Fair enough? Okay. So why don't we start out with, I think it's is it Pastor Q. Marie? General Dosen, Paula Minor, and I think that's Audrey. Is it Audrey George? Okay, and so we give them, at this point, we give them a minute, and go ahead, sir, and welcome.
Pastor Q, the church without walls. Pastor Q, Jean-Marie, I did not win the election in France. I'm glad I lost because I was a bigot. She has the same name I have, Marie Le Pen. So we're here today, and I'm reminded when Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you rest." Our community is weary. Once again, it feels like city leaders have supported this measure, and they're trying to throw black and brown folks under the bus with the appearance of accountability. What's at stake? Well, the status quo, and the status quo leads to death. Black bodies dropping on these pauper streets. Strange fruit. We keep talking about community policing and building trust. We, the community, are all here. Who did you talk to before putting the measure on the ballot? In 1964, Malcolm X declared, "It is the ballot or the bullet." In 2017, the prophecy is being fulfilled before our eyes.
Got to wrap it up, Rev.
Ballot to vote. No, we will continue to catch your bullets.
Thank you.
We demand real accountability, not politics.
Okay, Reverend, I got to give everybody about the same amount of time. Hey, guys, look, I want to, we're going to try, like I said, a minute each. Now, hold tight, hold tight. I want you to be engaged in a conversation, and I really do want to hear from you. So I'm asking to keep it to a minute because I want to let everybody that put in a card speak, but I do want to get engaged in a question and answer with the panel as well. Yes, sir.
General Dogon, civil rights organizer on Skid Row. I'm here with other members of LA CAN, and we're here today to oppose Amendment C. And I'll tell you why we oppose Amendment C, because Amendment C is not our vision of what a civilian panel would look like. And also, we don't see Measure C as addressing the current police brutality that's going around on Skid Row. The police station that patrols our community, Central Division, won the Meanest City Award for the worstest police station in America. And you don't get that type of title without violating the civil and human rights of thousands of residents, right? And so we see Measure C as a get-out-of-jail-free ticket for these police that's brutalizing us. We don't see it, you know what I'm saying, as something that's going to solve police brutality. And so our recommendations to you and to the mayor especially is, one, is to stop having these backdoor meetings, one, and start facing the community, because until the community is allowed, you know what I'm saying, to sit down at the table and talk about police brutality and what public safety means to us, we ain't going to never come to some type of conclusion on this. Right.
Thank you. So I'm looking for, I think it's Paula Minor, followed by, I think, Audrey. Are you here, George? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm an activist and with Black Lives Matters and a retired city employee. And in your opening remarks, Councilman Weston, you said that this is to be the beginning of conversations with the community about policing in LA. And I hope you keep your word on that part, because there needs to be conversations with you, our elected officials, about our police. Quickly, I agree with all of the facts that have been presented about Measure C, but I want to raise something that's very ironic, in that one of the members of our LA Police Commission, our supposedly civilian oversight commission, is an author of the language that's on the ballot for Measure C. So you wonder why we question what this whole process is. You wonder why we feel like this is a backroom deal. It doesn't make any sense that the people who are supposed to be overseeing LAPD are collaborating with the union and have participated in developing Measure C. So we say no on Measure C.
Thank you. So I saw her. There she is. Please come on up and state your name for the record.
My name is Audrey George. And a week ago, when we were at the police commission meeting, we were talking about officer-involved shootings, and it came up that there are 36 officers who had been involved in officer-involved shootings who were involved in at least 2 or 3, all 36 of them. That shows you a total lack of respect for the public and accountability. These police are not held accountable at this point, and you want to give them a free pass by initiating this entirely civilian, and I do put that in quotes, commission of people that are prone to be in favor of police anyway. And I just want to point out, as has been pointed out, over 70 names of organizations and people, including the LA Times, oppose this charter amendment, and yet when people get their ballots to vote, they will see no rebuttal. They will have this impression that there is unanimous approval of that measure, and that's because of the way you handled it.
Thank you for coming down. Do we have a Louise, I think it's Mbella, Downtown Women's Action Coalition? Please come forward.
Hello, everyone. You pronounce my name really well. The M is silent, Louise Mbella, and I am the former Downtown Women Action Coalition co-chair, Skid Row Women's Coalition Group. I wanted, first of all, to say thank you Thank you for allowing this conversation. I appreciate that. Thank you to all the officers who actually do their job. But I feel, in addition, I feel like this question is a question of equality. So how would you like if a family members, even of any officer, they're victim of crime, and the civilian who's allegedly guilty of that crime will decide and choose their fate, their form of punishment. I think in terms of safety for the community, even inside the police department, I would not feel comfortable working with a coworker who gets away with wrongdoing when I'm actually doing my job from my heart, according to my oath. So please revise this measure, including the community, and consider in terms of equality and choosing your form of punishment. Thank you.
Thank you for coming down. Okay, now I want to ask Mr. White, if it's okay, I'd like to ask you the first question. When you spoke, you referenced reimagine public safety. Yep. What do you mean?
So when I'm talking reimagine public safety, it's very clear that the Los Angeles Police Department budget, when we look at the general fund, is bloated. Over 52% of our general fund dollars is going to the police department. When we reimagine public safety, we are talking about an immediate divestment of resources from that bloated budget and moving those resources into things that really make us safe. Moving those things into parks, into schools, into houses, into community-based intervention for violence, right? And so we have folks in the community every day, right, keeping our community safe, making sure that some of that money that's going to the police department is actually going toward those purposes. That's what we talk about when we talk about reimagining public safety, that we are not safer when we're hiring more police officers, that we're not safer when we're creating a bigger surveillance apparatus, that we're not safer when we're having more conversations about more jails, and at the same time, taking away resources, slim resources for all those things that really make us safe.
Okay. I appreciate that. Ms. Lane, you talked about comprehensive reform. If you could just share, and you don't have to go into all the details, but I'm just really curious, and I'd like my colleagues to hear, when you say that, what are you talking about?
So when we talk about comprehensive reform, the police disciplinary process doesn't start at the moment when the chief declares that an officer has acted out of a policy or holds them to have conducted misconduct. Instead, the disciplinary process starts at the moment of the complaint. And that's why I took the time to lead with statistics around the department's response to complaints around racial profiling. I'm not even getting into issues that result in death or seriously bodily injury. So when we talk about comprehensive reform, it's looking at the entire process, not pulling a plug out of the entire process, including the BOR, to try to reform. We don't want piecemeal reform, we want comprehensive reform. To talk about more specifics, we can lead with things that were lifted in the CLA report that was presented to City Council in January and February. They outlined a number of issues as it relates to the Board of Rights specifically that the council should consider. One, they lift out that utilizing the council should consider utilizing the city attorney's office or others not employed by the LAPD to present facts supporting misconduct allegations to the Board of Rights. Number two, they talk the report lists council should support state legislation to increase transparency in investigations of police misconduct. Everyday residents should know who's policing them and what results when allegations are made and what results after these hearings are held. The release of Board of Rights decisions with officers' information redacted in the name of hearing officers. We talked about in previous council hearings digging deeper into the fiscal liabilities that result when allegations occur and when misconduct occurs. So those are some of the issues that this ad hoc committee could take up immediately to try to get us closer to comprehensive reform. But it's not only the questions that are asked, it's also who those questions are asked to. So we would encourage moving forward, this ad hoc committee should invite other community stakeholders, experts in the field, representation from even leadership in the department, looking at other jurisdictions around best practices. So it's about the questions that are asked, but also who's involved in the discussion.
Okay, so now I got a question that one for Jordan and Melanie, kind of yours, so you guys just kind of jump in on this. Jordan, you referenced a vision or need for a transparent civil review system. And you talked about, Melanie, or Ms. Ochoa, kind of altering the selection process where related to civilians. So if I could get you guys to just kind of expand on that a little bit, and I am taking notes.
I think as has already been lifted up, that's just simply the wrong question to be asking by focusing on this Board of Rights. Charter Amendment C, which is probably why it was so misguided, is that it was focused on only one element of a system that needs complete overhaul, as has already been discussed. And I think by even engaging the question of simply the process by which people are put onto this panel, you neglect to address the larger issue that this is, again, not an element of civilian oversight whatsoever. It's only a means.
Well, let's say it's
by
not
holding
even,
people
let's say the question doesn't even relate to the review panel. Just, we all talk about civilians should be engaged in the total process. So I guess to broaden my question, how would you look for folk that could participate from us that are civilians in a? How would you, if you had the power to get and you wanted to make sure that there was civilian participation, how would you go about getting folk to be on your police commission, individuals to do Board of Right reviews? That's kind of like what I'm getting at.
I think that's an important question, but it's still a question that can't be answered in a vacuum. It's part of a larger part of overhaul, and without identifying what other structures are also going to be changed, need to be changed, and how resources are going to be reallocated, you cannot simply start throwing civilians in at random places in this disciplinary process. I think it needs to be answered, but I think it's not something that can be answered.
So then
in a vacuum.
it comes back a little bit to the comprehensive reform.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Jordan, did you? And then I'll let whoever else wants to jump in, but I do want to see what your response, Jordan, is, because you referenced, and I wanted to give you a minute to expand on that transparency, because I want to try to understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take away from anything that she just said, because I definitely fully agree with that. I mean, if you really want to narrow it down on the specifics of the Board of Rights, even though that's only one.
I want you to give me whatever you feel comfortable in giving me.
I mean, with the Board of Rights, you have a process where a lawyer who participates in the Board of Rights and was a former member of the Police Protective League talks about how it's a secret process about how these people get chosen, about how they're confident these people won't go against the police. To me, there's nothing transparent about that. There's no participation of ordinary civilians in that process. We need something completely different. I feel like a lot of the members of this panel might have a better idea of specific policies of what they want, but from my understanding of this Board of Rights and my research and talking to police union officials, there is nothing transparent about this.
That's a fair response. Anybody else want to chime in on this? And then I'm going to get some more folk from the public to come up and give their comments.
Council President, I think there's a lot that can be learned in community efforts around civilian oversight. The Dignity and Power Now and the Coalition to End Sheriff Violence did expansive research and work on civilian oversight bodies and how different jurisdictions actually involve everyday residents in oversight of law enforcement. And again, I think the question needs to be posed and there needs to be deeper research. But there's a couple practices in other jurisdictions, including Atlanta and Newark, whose appointment process of civilians includes multiple entities and stakeholders. So, for example, in New Jersey, the Civilian Complaint Review Board consists of 9 members of the public appointed by the mayor, elected members of the city council, and community-based organizations. So the community is actually involved in making appointments to their civilian oversight board.
Newark, and what was the other one?
Atlanta. So Atlanta's 11-member civilian oversight board is appointed by also a variety of different entities. There's an appointment from the mayor, one from the city council, one specifically from the president of the city council, one from 4 neighborhood planning units, which is similar to our neighborhood council system. And so there's different models, and those are just 2. But one, again, going back to my original statement, inviting Dignity and Power Now, inviting stakeholders that were involved in the effort to create the sheriff's civilian oversight body can provide helpful information to move the city's work, as well as looking at other jurisdictions that have civilian oversight boards. And as it relates to the question around transparency, again, I want to take our attention back to 2 of the points that were brought up in the CLA report. Transparency, plainly, for everyday residents, I made a complaint. I want to know if it was sustained. I want to know how many complaints against this officer have been made around allegation, and that there are huge state legislative barriers to transparency in investigations of police misconduct. And so one of the things that were identified in the subsequent motion that was passed by council that created this ad hoc committee was a directive for the city attorney to look into what are those legislative barriers to having more transparency in police investigations. We would really strongly urge this committee to make that number 1 in terms of the discussions that need to be had in this space, because there is actually state law that's prohibitive around transparency, and we would like the city to support efforts to reform those state laws.
Okay.
And I think
before, okay, because I was going to say,
really quick.
Mr. White, before I go, does anybody else want to chime in? So why don't we go to Mr. White, and we'll go to Ms. Abdullah, then I want to I'm going to get to you.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
So I have a couple of thoughts. We stand on the shoulders of a lot of folks who have been fighting this battle for a long time. I'm thinking about Michael Zinzin from COPPA. I'm thinking about Anthony Thigpen, who was also with COPPA, who does a whole lot of other things now. I think the cries and the demands that people have had over the years remain the same, right? People have always talked about real civilian control over the police department and pulling it out of the politics or the politricks that we see. People talk about independent investigations. People talk about the ability to subpoena officers. There's been conversations around taking it out of the mayor's offices and making it an elected system. So there are comprehensive looks from the past that sort of give us direction and information in terms of the direction we need to go. And lastly, I will say, from your own CLA report, and this is something that no one mentions, that one of the options that the CLA placed before you, before we went the Charter Amendment C route, was that you had the authority to scrap the entire process, to go to voters and say the entire thing is broken. Do you want to engage in a process to fix the whole thing? And I've come before you and I've said that a number of times, but I want to put it on public record again, that is the process that we're interested in. That process, the system that we have today, is broken for folks in our community. The only folks who it's working for is the police state. When I look at We Charge Genocide by W.E.B. Du Bois, he talks about mission creep, and he talks about the form of representative government known by most people in our communities, and this was in 1951, was the presence of the police force. That was the government, representative government that we've known. The whole damn thing is broken. We need to take it apart and rebuild it.
Okay. Doc?
So I know that for some people, this is a game. This is a political game for those who have ambitions to move to higher office. It's a game of political musical chairs, right? But for us, in the community, this is not a game. These are real people who are affected by police brutality, who are affected by police abuse, who are affected by police terror, right? I'm wearing the button of Waukesha Wilson, right? Sister Lisa misses her daughter. This is a real person, right? Just a couple weeks ago, the grandmother of Keith Bursey was in the room when the police commission ruled that the killing of her grandson was in policy, right? And so this is not about games. This is about the real lives of people. And when we weaken police discipline, that has an impact on my children, on your children and your grandchildren. And so we need to think about this seriously. I believe that even well-intentioned civic leaders are pulled into the game playing, because what you're taught to do and what you're pulled into doing is tinkering around the edges of a fundamentally flawed system, right? So Pastor Q just talked about rearranging the furniture on the Titanic. That's kind of what you think you're doing, right? At best, you know, at worst, right, you're actually giving things away to guilty police, right? So I think this whole conversation about reimagining public safety, I don't know why this is coming out of my mouth, but I'm going to say it anyway, and it'll probably be the last time I say it. If we're to learn anything from this current administration in Washington, it's to think big, right? So they have their agenda for us. They have an agenda for us. They're talking building walls. They're talking deportation. They're talking mass arrest. They're talking all these kinds of horrible plans that we never thought could ever even come to be. On our side, those who call themselves liberals, those who call themselves progressives, those who think that they are tied to the people, doing the work of the people, we can't be tinkering around edges. We have to be thinking big and doing the work that actually helps people walk with more freedom. So we're saying, when we say reimagine public safety, it might seem like all you're restricted to is tinkering around the edges, saying, okay, well, maybe if we add this other board, maybe it will do something. And then we can have conversations after the fact about what a civilian is. That's too small. It's both wrong and it's too small. What we should be doing, what we would like our leaders to do, is to think big, to reimagine public safety. Every study says what makes communities safe is investments in mental health, investments in livable wage jobs, investments in parks and cultural programs and after-school programs. That is the research. I've done the research. That's my actual job. You can do the research too. You can reimagine public safety. You can shift those dollars and say, you know, this is what we're going to invest in. We're not going to engage in giveaways to guilty cops. We are going to invest in our community.
Okay. All right. You got to keep it down. I'm trying to get to you guys now. So I'm going to have some more public comment, and then we'll see if some of the other members have questions or what have you. So let's look for JoJo Smith. JoJo, please come forward. I believe this is Adam Rice. Rabbi Cohen. Terence Marsh. Yes, sir.
JoJo Smith of Los Angeles Community Action Network. When we talk about public safety, is when the public has a right to be here. When you look at Measure C, it shows that the police can just keep doing what they're doing and the hell with our communities. Because black lives do matter to us, but it shows that this council, black lives don't matter. So we need to think about what our lives are to y'all. Because we know y'all nothing but a bunch of pile of tricks. So we need to look at where this money is going. $81 million? I see a lot of stuff that LA could be having with the $81 million. If we the people keep paying these tax dollars for the cops to go out and kill us, we're fools.
Okay, next speaker, please.
Good evening. I'm Rabbi Arya Cohen. I'm the rabbi in residence for Bend the Ark, Jewish Partnership for Action.
Rabbi, welcome.
Oh, there you go. I'm Rabbi Arya Cohen. I'm the rabbi in residence for Bend the Ark, a Jewish Partnership for Social Justice. I want to make 2 points. First is the obvious point that Charter Amendment C is misrepresenting what civilian oversight is, rather than allowing greater involvement in the disciplinary procedures and therefore increasing the accountability of the LAPD. This amendment affords the LAPD officers already disciplined another chance to have their discipline or suspension lightened or removed. These concerns have been amply articulated by the panel of experts, and I agree with their concerns. However, beyond that, I'm worried about the way that the effect of a special election is undermining democracy. This is the worst type of civic engagement. Rather than opening a topic for wider discussion, this process evades conversation, evades the voices of the people. The people in this room, however, are all saying that it's not going to work this time.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Next speaker, and then I want to get Shawnee, if you could get in line, and Rachel Day. Yes, identify yourself, please, sir.
My name is Adam Rice, Councilmember Wesson. I don't know if I could go on this specific topic better than my comrades have. Perhaps the need for it would be important. So you can ask Charlie Quinang what the definition of public safety is, or you could have if on March 1st, 2015, he was not beaten, tased, and then murdered by the Los Angeles Police Department. You could have an example of a powerful policy of accountability and trust between the public and the police if his murderers had not been allowed to walk, despite the fact that your average taser takes 3 to 7 seconds to put its victim into a submissive state. However, the shots rang out between the tasing of Charlie Quinang and his murder in 0.8 seconds. Yet there was no review. There was no policy, and Measure C will not help that happen. Public safety needs to be reimagined.
Thank you. Please identify yourself, sir.
Hi, my name is Terence Marsh, and good afternoon, everyone. Imagine a florist who had managed to pick all the red roses in California. That would be considered a great bit excessive. This is the same feeling that we have with the police department that abuses their privilege in our community. There need to be more black police officers on the force and leadership to ensure fairness when they're hired. So incidents like Christopher Norton, a tragedy to all. As an ex-military, I felt personally wounded by what unfolded. Please, I'm openly desperate to show my intent to be law-abiding, respectful, loving, kind, nice. Wonder if you're willing to reciprocate. I am a designer driving. I'm an engineer, security officer, doctor, military, active, retired, lawyer, parent, actor, astronaut, also a rapper. Okay. Thank you for your time, and thank you for...
No, thank you for coming down, man. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Please identify yourself.
My name is Rachel Day, and I'm a community member of Community Coalition, but I was born and raised in LA, and I feel compelled to come to this meeting because it's just so important for us as a community to understand the impact of what's going on more than just hearing it from a political standpoint. So I want to start off. Our LAPD, too much is given, much is required. Our community is looking for LAPD to protect and serve, to present a positive image, to become accountable to the public, which has to be reflected in pure respect and the whole truth. Community Coalition, as stated before, has collected nearly over 4,000 surveys across South LA, and 80% of our residents are reporting concerns about police using excessive force, getting away with misconduct, and treating people of color unfairly. The community becomes hesitant to using the police as a means of intervention. Mainly what I've experienced is that I want to call on the police, know that it's fair, know that they're serving us appropriately, and that there is a service or there is something that can monitor their service so that we can really know that we're being treated fairly.
Thank you. And you're Miss Day, right, Rach? Okay. Thank you. Next speaker. Yes, ma'am. You, Shawnee?
Yes. Good evening. evening, Council. I'm here to. I'm Johnny Jackson, and I'm with Community Coalition, and I'm here to voice the experience and the empathy that I feel in my community. I'm a resident of I am a resident of South LA, and I wanted to let you know that there are too many police shootings in South Los Angeles. Period. Measure C emboldens the LAPD to continue to abuse their power because it does not bring real, true accountability to an already broken justice system. In addition, officers guilty of misconduct should be charged with administrative.
Take your time. It's all
Should
right.
be, okay, I'm saying it's wrong, I'm a little nervous, but I'm telling you what I feel. The officers that are guilty of misconduct should be charged with administrative, should not have administrative pay.
Finish your thought, dear. Go ahead.
Real police reform will make the officers pay for the injustice and brutality, not the people in our tax dollars. Thank you.
No, thank you. Please, I don't know if I called you, but your name is?
My name is Albert Nixon, and I'm just going to make it real plain. I'm with LA Can.
Okay, Albert, I'm going to hold Albert's time. And Albert, I'm going to let you speak. But guys, let me try to call you up so that there's some uniformity as to who gets up and when. So, Albert, I saw your name is somewhere in here, but I didn't call you, but you're up there, so I'm going to let you finish your statement.
I appreciate that
Go
because
ahead.
I'm going to make it real plain.
Go ahead.
I'm a victim of police brutality, but I want to make a suggestion. Why don't you have a law for 3 strikes for police officers that are guilty of violent crimes? And that's all I see.
Albert, I appreciate you coming down. Okay, I'm going to call one more. I'm going to do one more speaker now, then I'm going to go to Mr. Koretz for a couple of questions. So do we have Helen Bell? Would you please come forward, Miss Bell? Take your time.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, how are you guys?
Pull the mic down a little bit.
How are you guys?
I'm on top of the world.
I just want to say something. First of all, I have policemen in my family. I grew up in Louisiana, and the chief of police used to come back in the day when it wasn't integrated and sit on the front porch and drink coffee with my father. So we're not against you guys. We just want you to be fair. I live down by USC, and I talk to the policemen all the time. One day, I stopped him because I had a question. And my question was, why, when you see more than 2 black men, Latino kids, they're gang members. But if you see 4 white kids, they're students at USC. How do you decide who's not a student and who is a student? I want to know that. I want to know that if I see the policeman, or if my grandson see the policeman, or my black children in that community see the policeman, they don't have to fear that the policeman is going to throw them down and have them kiss the ground. We don't need that. I can remember when you used to come in and talk to the people in the community. I remember when you used to go to the schools and talk to the children. Why not have a day and go to the schools and talk to the children so that they don't have to fear the policeman, that they can know that you are there to protect and serve, not to kill and let us all die.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Koretz had a couple of questions.
And thank you all for being here. My first question is, as a council member, I supported this measure, and I recognize that it's only a modest piece of reform. It's just a toe in the water, and we should do more, and I'm sure we will do more in the future. But as a tiny bit of reform, I supported this expecting it to be a positive, and then we find out that civilians actually in this process we're more favorable to the officers than other officers. That's not necessarily anybody's intent on the council. So the question is, can we pass this item, and I think it probably will pass, but then use the best practices to select the actual civilians and to keep them on the body rather than having the folks that are more favorable getting the assignments. Is there anything that makes that impossible for us to look at the best practices in places like Atlanta and Newark and other places and actually put together civilian review that is an honest, transparent civilian review and might actually be tougher rather than more lenient on officers?
Before this thing was hand carried to the city council. I think it is important to note, based on the LA Times story today, that this thing was 2 years in the making. That's 2 years too long. All the questions that you have now are the questions that you should have had an engaged community. It was quite interesting when I looked at the Police Protective League and their comment, or no, actually not the Police Protective League, the mayor's office, who said our constituents will have their opportunity at the polls. That is how democracy works. Are you kidding me? When you think about the 1992 Christopher Commission, they pulled together community groups and academics and organizers and others to discuss what was wrong with the system before moving forward with Charter Amendment F. Now, Charter Amendment F clearly has problems as well, but the process leading up to it was responsive to the public. It put the P back into public policy. There is no P in letter C in public policy. I wasn't even trying to rhyme at all. And it's too late. It's too late. And so for you, I would say you also have to do your due diligence, right? We shouldn't be here today on the eve of the election, and I'm going to let you know we're going to try to make sure it does not pass. We should not be here now saying, hopefully we can do something afterward. We can't make a bad bill better.
Mr. Did you want to?
Yes.
I'll be right back.
Not a smoke break, huh? Not a smoke break.
To be clear, I'm not going.
Just so you all know, there's no escaping conversation. There are speakers. I ran out to the restroom. You hear? We have speakers in there too. So.
All right.
So.
I got no mic.
Yeah.
Your mic.
No mic. There we go.
There you go.
All right.
And to be clear, I'm not going to impute any motive to the city council, but the record was before you when you voted that the civilians currently on the Board of Rights were the most lenient participants. And these same groups also raised that in public comments and in writing. So to say that the council was unaware that this would be the effect I don't think that's a genuine comment, given what was actually in the record at the time that the vote was taken. And secondly, on the point of reforming the Board of Rights by changing its makeup as a part of police reform, again, I'll reiterate that the Board of Rights is not and cannot be an element of civilian oversight because it only functions to reduce the discipline that officers already found guilty of misconduct receive. It can't find officers that, for example, the police commission determined acted out of policy that led to the death of an individual resident that Chief Beck then decides not to punish. It can't reach over Chief Beck and determine that individual needs to be punished. It also can't increase the penalties for an individual that Chief Beck decided to punish very leniently. So it's just misguided to think that we can enact Charter Amendment C and then change it some way into some real element of civilian oversight when it was never intended to function that way, and it can never be that.
But do you believe that if we actually use a better process, that we can create a group of civilians that handles this issue in an appropriate way.
So I go back to the CLA report that gave you the option of scrapping the entire thing, right? The CLA report said you can do a number of things, one of which is we can start all over again, right? And in starting all over again, you have a more comprehensive conversation with folks in this room and folks who have been fighting for police reform and reform that changes the material conditions of people in the community. Just because we say reform doesn't mean anything changes in the attitudes and or the culture that continues to produce trauma in our communities. We are interested in only reform that changes the material outcomes. In this case, those material outcomes is not spending $251 million over 4 or 5 years in liability payouts. In meaningful reforms, we're saying not spending $81 million last year in liability payouts. Right? In meaningful reforms, we're saying not going to the police commission and having to lift the names of black bodies who continue to be murdered, right? Those are meaningful reforms that we're talking about, and you don't get that after the fact.
Councilmember Koretz, I think it's also important to note that the issues with the Board of Rights process is not narrowly focused on the civilian participation. So in addition to the police union has framed this issue or the problem being around civilians and their participation. But what we are intending to present to you today, that it's not just about the civilian participation. The Board of Rights process is flawed in other ways. First, let's assume, which again we're fighting for it to not pass, but let's assume that Measure C does pass. All it does is add an additional option for officers who've been found of misconduct to choose the disciplinary process. So while, yes, there is a problem, I think the CLA report has lifted real issues around the selection of the civilians who sit on the Board of Rights. There is a commitment from this council to explore how that process is done, who's selected, and that we are committed to making sure the council follows through on that investigation. But the Board of Rights process is flawed in other ways. And so to actually strengthen a weak and disrupted system through Measure C is problematic, and then trying to fix it on the back end. It's not just about the civilian participation. It's the fact that officers who have been found of misconduct will now have 2 bodies that they can choose. They choose the LAPD management that sits on that one panel, as well as the civilians that sit on that panel. And then we're going to give them a second option to choose among a whole panel of civilians that, again, they actually have power to choose. So that's it's not just around the civilian, how we define civilian. That's just one piece of it.
Okay, I want to get some more public. I want to try to get everybody. So, yeah, but I want to try to get everybody.
So, just very quickly, I want to underscore what Karen just said about the choice. So, I know that you say that you were looking for an opportunity to reform police. I think that all of us can see anytime guilty cops get to choose what their disciplinary process is, leaving in place the existing system or choosing this new system, and they get that choice, it is bad for residents, right? So we need to recognize that this was not an honest attempt at reform. And if you didn't understand that, one of the things that you can always do is go to the community, because community is, we're experts on our own experiences, right? So to cut the community out of the process and say the Police Protective League get to determine what's placed on the ballot, that is a flawed process in and of itself. The thing that hasn't been said, just with regard to your question, and what I hear you, if you're authentic in your question, what I hear you asking underneath it is, what can you do now, because you've already decided that this should go on the ballot, right? That's all you've decided, right? I know that there's a mailer that's out that has all 15 of your faces on it, right? That doesn't mean that needs to stay your position. Let me be real clear. I hear my comrades saying that maybe it'll pass. I'm going to say it's definitely not passing. We're going to do everything in our power to defeat Measure C. We have unanimity in the room. We have unanimity in the community as well, right? So whose side do you want to be on? If your question is, what can you do now that you voted, to put this on the ballot, what you can do now is join the growing list of organizations, of individuals, of community members, of even media who say vote no on C. You can switch sides, no on C.
Okay. All right. Let me. I want to afford a few more of you the opportunity to speak. So I'm calling on Annabella, and I can't do the last name, so I'm going to depend on you. And I think I have an Augustine Cabrera, which I might have butchered, Emmy Mclean, and an Eddie H. Please come forward. And don't wait in order, sir. You can just come on. Because I want to try to get everybody up.
Hello, Council. My name is Agustin Cabrera, a community organizer with the LA Alliance for a New Economy. Lane closely works with organizations and community members that would greatly be affected by Measure C. We are concerned that Measure C is an attempt to weaken police accountability and is incredibly misleading. We are concerned that civilians currently on the Board of Rights are the most lenient on police discipline. If the Police Protective League wants true civilian oversight of police misconduct, civilians on the board should be represented by the communities most impacted by the interactions with the police. This process is flawed and excludes the majority of LA civilians. The city should do its due diligence to investigate and revamp the disciplinary process of police misconduct. Measure C is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker. Yes, ma'am. Please identify yourself.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Anabela Mazariegos. What I think about Charter C is we are spinning the wheels around and around without no results. Okay, abuse of power by the uniform in law enforcement exists, especially on us minorities. The Civilian Commission is not going to work because they just only recommend and somebody else makes the decision. So that is no. The union, they're going to fight, but we have a solution that we should try. For every law enforcement who has to carry a gun and a uniform, they must have their own liability insurance. It's enough the taxpayers manage abuse. They can pay from their own pocket. Attorneys and lawyers, they have their own liability insurance. Why we cannot demand from our law enforcement? If I go to the Civil Commission, they're going to ignore me. If I come to the City Hall, they're going to ignore me. The Police Commission, everywhere, they will ignore me. But with referendum, we can make the difference. We're all united because we're not happy the way the uniformed men acting upon us, the minorities. We don't have no future for our kids. Our kids are really with lack of self-esteem. We're all fear of the uniform because we don't know who's in the right mind. We have mental disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Emmy Mclean, and I'm a lawyer with the National Day Laborer Organizing Network and
Yes.
an LA resident.
I've seen you before.
I represent a mother and a grandmother who was placed in deportation proceedings as a result of egregious and callous LAPD misconduct. An officer handed her to ICE and lied blatantly, with disastrous consequences that she is still suffering. I live in a city and a country where my black and brown neighbors feel at risk from the police sworn to protect them. With a history of killings and brutality and without accountability, their fears and concerns are not misplaced. For these and many other reasons, I believe in police oversight. This is not that. I also believe in meaningful civilian oversight. This is not that either. If we wanted real police oversight, we would not be debating Measure C. If we wanted real police oversight, we would be creating real and meaningful mechanisms to hold officers accountable. We would be engaging in real police reform. We need leadership to take up the challenge and walk with us in the right direction and not try to distract with window dressing. Thank you.
So, do I have Eddie H? And did I call Griffin Fuller Jr.? Okay, come on up. And then I'm going to go to Mr. Englander for a couple of questions. Yes, sir.
Eddie H., Los Angeles Community Action Network. It is said that if the foundation is flawed, everything subsequently built upon that foundation is going to be flawed. So what we talk about is systemic things that are continuing to happen. And when we talk about reform, we've been talking about reform for hundreds of years, and nothing has happened. It's not about being a reformation, but it's about being an abolition. This system needs to be abolished. The way it's done, who does it? When you talk about reimagining public safety, we've got to reimagine who is making the rules on public safety and how they're doing it. If you have the same individuals doing the same job, then that's the definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. So when we talk about reforming a system, we're talking about getting people in place that can truly reform the system. And I will also say that this measure, the horse is out of the barn, and now we're having these discussions. You know, there should be other people at this table, mainly the Police Protective League, so they can see the animus in this room of individuals who have come together, united against this system.
Thank you.
And in closing,
No, Eddie, I got to give you just about what everybody else. So I need Mr. Griffin Jr. It's your time now. Come on now. No, and we'll. This isn't the only one, Mr. Eddie H. This isn't the only one. Yes, sir.
Am I ready?
Relax and go ahead.
Okay. Week after week, people come up to these commissioner meetings, the police commissioner meetings, and these council meetings, and they share their heartfelt words, and I hope that they're not falling on deaf ears. Some of these words have to resonate with some of you and have to resonate with your humanity and your integrity, if you have any. Civilians need to be appointed separate and independent of the blue apparatus, someone who do not have a personal and a political allegiance to the LAPD. People who oppose police brutality are very much capable of being objective and making rational decisions in regards to police misconduct. LAPD corruption on record goes back to the 1920s with Chief James E. Davis, and still we're here in 2017 talking about the same thing. Do you think that black and brown skin is equivalent to criminality? Because there's nothing criminal about having black and brown skin, as was reflected in this police department. This is not a threat, but this is a warning. The days of no accountability are numbered. There will be an uprising if things do not change.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to try to get back to the rest of you, but I want to kick it over to Mr. Englander for a couple of questions.
Thank you. Actually, before I open to questions, I want to sincerely thank all of you for being here, truly. And I'm here to listen, but I also want you to know why I'm here, for those of you that don't know me. I'm not going to claim that I've ever walked in your shoes, but I've had my own road getting here. I was homeless. My family was homeless. My father left when I was 5. My brother was in and out of homes and always in trouble with the police. I buried my sister at 40 years old. She died in my arms because of the environment we live in. My uncle raised me. He stepped up and he was killed, shot in the back, an attempted robbery in an alley when he was leaving work as a janitor. I haven't walked in your shoes, walked in my own. I've seen a lot at a young age. And that's why I do what I do. That's why I'm sitting here. To make it better for others, to make it easier for others, to make it safer for others. I want to name this panel after listening to you. You talked a lot about the Police Protective League. I want to call you guys the Public Protective League. And what you're speaking of, and from the heart and passion, is genuine. So how do we reform? First of all, I know we've talked a lot about Measure C. And clearly, I think the opinion here, and those that have gathered and are speaking, say it's fatally flawed. It's a poison pill. If at best, it's tinkering around the edges, if I use your words, at best. But this isn't the Measure C panel. This is the Police Reform Committee, one that I'm honored to sit here and listen to you, and hopefully more often in the future. Because that's where reform comes in, is not with a pen and not by any one interest. It's by dialogue. It's by conversation. It's by listening to those who are impacted. And I want to thank our council president for assembling this, because this didn't have to be done. And you didn't have to be here. But you're here. And hopefully more often. with that, I do have a question. I have several questions. One of the major reforms that could or could not be a reform, and I don't know your position on this, and maybe you have different positions, and this has nothing to do with Measure C, is body-worn cameras. And there's a major dialogue and there's a conversation that's taking place as we speak that's out in the community asking not the question of whether we should or shouldn't have them, but access, transparency, viewing them. I think, from what I've heard, who I've met with, and what I've read, and I've studied up on it, that is a possibility for a reform. There is no end-all, be-all. It's the processes, it's the training, it's the type of officers, it's the discipline, it's everything. Everything. No doubt. No question in my mind. A lot of work needs to be done.
Okay,
Hey,
now,
well,
wait. Let's let him. I'm going to let you guys speak. Nobody interrupted you. Let us have a real meeting where we can go back and forth. And I want to hear from you.
And
Mitch wants to hear from you. Paul wants to hear. Let him finish. Let him finish. I'm trying to get to everybody.
No, I
Go
appreciate that. And I'm sure everybody will have an opinion on a particular video that has or hasn't been released or what's been done in the past. We're talking about moving forward. We're not talking about the policies that have been put in place either by the Police Commission, the Police Protective League, or the Chief of Police. We're talking about crafting and creating, and what they're doing now, a new policy. So I just wanted to hear, in moving forward, what would a new policy look like, or should we even have officers with in-car video and or on-body cameras at all? One of the new policies is also I wanted you to cover, and I know it's vague, and they're beginning to implement a de-escalation policy. And I hadn't heard that mentioned yet. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that. And I know you have an opinion. There's probably nothing I could possibly bring up or a question I would guarantee that you don't have an opinion on. And that's what we're here for. I truly want to hear it. And so if I can open up that dialogue just to share your thoughts, I would appreciate it. And again, thanks for coming out tonight.
I'd like to start on that. I really enjoyed your presentation about who you are. There's one thing that's left out, that you're a former LAPD officer, right?
I am not.
Or former cop?
No,
Were you a cop?
Let me address that. I didn't leave anything out. I'm not a former LAPD officer. I've never been a full-time police officer. I'm a reserve LAPD officer, and let me explain what that means.
You're a law enforcement.
Let me explain what that means. From what I've been through and what I've done in my community, I have. Please. Happy you brought it up, and I'm proud of it.
Okay.
I work for free in the community as an officer
you're still a cop.
with at-risk youth. I've built at-risk youth centers, I've built after-school programs, and work as an officer working with all of them as well, and I'm really proud of that.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of officers do that kind of thing, but I just wanted to point out to the people who are here, who came here because we asked them to come here. These are all members of LA CAN and Black Lives Matter and Community Coalition, residents of Skid Row, residents of South Los Angeles. That's who's in this room. This is our folks that are in this room who care very deeply about this issue. And so I wanted to lift that up because although I really appreciate you sharing a bit of who you are, I wanted folks to understand more of who you are. And I know you can't do
one last thing with the dialogue.
Let me finish this real quick, okay? And so I just want to also lift up some of your words when you said that policies shouldn't just be put in place or don't just need to be put in place by the police commission or the city council, or you included the Police Protective League. The Police Protective League does not have the authority to put policies in place, or should not. They should not have the authority to walk over policy and then you all put it on the ballot. So I'm glad that you're here and that you're asking us questions, but we also have questions and demands of you. And so you know, I'm a single mom of 3 kids. I'm not going to stay beyond 8 o'clock because it's bedtime. But I will, before I go, I think the community wants me to ask you. You hear unanimity here. We are all no on C. Yes? So as elected representatives, you hear your constituents saying loudly, no on C. On the yes side, if you go on that website, there is nobody there except you, the mayor, the Police Protective League, and 2 commissioners, right? One of whom helped to craft the legislation in what I think to be an unethical move. So we are asking you, Paul Koretz, Herb Wesson, Mitch Englander, will you join the people, and we want your response, in vote and encouraging folks to vote no on Charter Amendment C?
Okay, well,
Do we want an answer? We want an answer?
okay. No. Hey, we don't have to yell and scream. We don't have to. This isn't a police commission. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to let you talk, okay? So I'm just saying, let's just relax.
But we're asking very,
I understand.
Politely, can you
I
answer
understand exactly what you're asking. I understand exactly. Okay, I cannot. I don't think, from a legal perspective, that the 3 of us
you as
could
individuals
even.
can.
I don't think that during a city hearing that we can't even engage in politicking. Okay. You know, I can say electioneering, I think, is technically, so I don't know what we can say or not where it relates to that. I know that we do need to be careful. No, I'm just, hey, man, I'm telling you that no. I want to diplomatically say and help me that I am not of the mind to change action that I've done prior to the 16th. And I might have, and I will gladly talk to you afterwards and let you know exactly. I think that's about as general as I can answer that from a legal perspective. And I don't have an attorney here to let us know. But we're trying to create a dialogue so that we can listen to you. We are trying to put ourselves in a position where we can make things better. And maybe you don't appreciate this hearing. Maybe you don't appreciate my answer, but I am genuinely trying to let your voices be heard. And I think the 3 of you that I've talked to know that that's where I'm coming from. I'm trying to create a conversation that doesn't just last tonight and goes away. This is about police reform. And I do want to hear from you, and we do want to make changes. So, you know, I really would not put you guys on the spot from a legal perspective. And I
Can
just
they speak in generalities?
no, I you know, as the chair of the committee, as the president of the council, I'll take all the weight myself. But I don't need you guys. You can issue something when it's off-city time on your non-city stuff. But that's not what we're here about today.
Well, it's
So-
part of what we're here about, and I want to respond to you about body-worn cams. There's a Temple University study that shows in cities that have required body-worn cams, you actually see an increase in police brutality and police killings. You can look that one up yourself. You can also look at the history of LAPD with the majority of officers breaking dash cams off of their cars when they were required in the 77th Division. So if you want to know where we stand on body cams as a solution, you should look at the research.
Okay, no, this is, if I could, I want to address two things, because you asked me a question, and I appreciate the council president answering on all our behalf. But you have pointed out from a very strong perspective of where there's some fatal flaws in Measure C. And with that election around the corner, I look forward to that conversation. And I'm going to use your words, it will fail, so we won't have to have the conversation. But if and so it doesn't, we should on implementation. Now, having said that, on the body-worn cameras, I want to make sure I got this right. The Temple City study. I've read the San Jose studies. I've read many of the other studies. I know well about the in-car video and the antennas that they were taking off. That has been obviously fixed, not the antennas, but the policy where those haven't occurred again. But this is what I want to get your input on. Some of those questions that I asked as well. And I sincerely, I do want to hear your thoughts on some of those issues as well.
Councilmember Englander, I think you're asking very important questions that need to be asked, and we know that there's a public process where there's a series of town halls. This meeting was agendized to talk about the Board of Rights process, and so while I think these are very valid questions that should be the subject of the ad hoc committee, it's a bit outside of the scope of what we were collectively prepared to discuss today.
Oh, that's fair.
But I think in terms of moving forward and where this ad hoc committee should focus, I want to bring our attention back to what the council has already committed to. Again, I just want to repeat it so that it's marked and noted and highlighted. There are 4 areas that the council committed to exploring through the ad hoc committee. One is looking at legislative barriers to transparency. It is major and huge about what can be shared with the general public around police investigations and investigating police misconduct. So it is critical that the city take the time to look into those barriers and look into the efforts to actually reform state law so that public can have access to information as it relates to police misconduct. We do want to see an examination. The second thing that this council has already committed to is looking into how do we actually accomplish civilian oversight and looking into best practices, looking into how civilians are both appointed to not only the LAPD Police Commission, but as well as the Board of Rights process. So we look forward to this ad hoc committee actually carrying out and executing collective and comprehensive discussions around that issue as well. The third issue that the council has already committed to exploring in this ad hoc committee is the financial and fiscal liabilities that result from unaddressed misconduct and rapid and patterns of misconduct in the city of Los Angeles. In a moment where the city council is passing a budget where things like grid and gang intervention and community-based initiatives are being reduced in funding, we want to make sure that our public spending is informed by best practices and things that are actually keeping us safe in our communities that are led by community. And so those are 3 of the things that this council has already committed to doing. And again, it's about asking the right questions, but also having the right people in the room to answer them. Right. And that the people should be invited here include community organizations. We are 4 organizations out of a number of organizations across the city and county who every day wake up to organize residents around police reform and to bring better policing into our communities. So we encourage you all to invite those folks into the room to share their perspective, not only on police cameras, de-escalation, accountability, but the issues that we've outlined. And in addition, we've already quoted several studies, and that's just, again, from our limited examination. The city has resources, an arsenal full of resources. How do you bring experts in the field, research that's been done to accompany everyday residents who can come and share their perspective? So it's about the right questions, but it's also about who do you include in the discussion. And again, we are looking to the council, and I don't want to take away from my comrades' question and challenge to each of you to reconsider your position on Measure C. I think that's important, and whatever setting that you can do that, whether it's the hallway or the parking lot, that you consider doing that today. But we definitely want to hold you all accountable to the things that this council has already committed to do in this ad hoc committee.
And you said there were 4. Those were the 3. You went through legislative.
At 7:52,
Right.
I
Sorry.
think 4.
I'm not holding you to that. I just want to take notes and be accurate.
And also looking at the fiscal responsibility, looking at civilian
Civilian,
oversight.
legislative, transparency, the financial and fiscal, and yeah, so I've got those 3. Yeah, we'll come back to it.
So,
you know what?
so
There's
I
a lot
would
more.
definitely-
There's a lot more than 3. So
just look at the motion that was crafted by the city council.
Hold
and all
tight,
4
Mr.
things-
White.
Okay.
The commitments that I laid out in the motion, we will adhere to.
That's right.
And obviously, there was somewhat of a misunderstanding because I thought that I communicated to you that anything could be discussed during this hearing. I wanted you to be able to say whatever you felt that you wanted to say. And I do want to recommit to you that this is not the last time that you're going to be asked to come and sit before this panel and speak your mind without anybody shouting you down or anybody harass. I want you to know that when you walk in here that you're going to be afforded the opportunity to state your case. I gave you my word. I will keep my word on that. So what I need to do now, though, because it is getting late for some, I want to try to get some more of the public comments if I can, because we've had people here. So I do have a Joyce Fantroy. I can't quite make this. Is it an Aaron or Eric? Last name begins with an M. Aaron, maybe? Gilbert Johnson. Alexis Ortiz. Please come forward, because I think the clock is ticking on us here. Yes, ma'am. Identify yourself.
I'm Joyce Van Troy, and I'm a member of the Community Coalition. I also volunteer with LAPD.
Good.
I'm a member of the Community Police Advisory Board because I would like to see the gap bridged between police officers and the community. That's why I'm there. But the points that I want to make has been addressed by the panel already. But I had a real concern when I read the Measure C. There wasn't much difference between yes and no. It's just give the police the right for their board of right panel. And so I think even with the civilians that are on the panel, the selection process. So I think the whole measure should be revised. But although you're engaging in the conversation after the measure is on the battle, that was my point and my concern. So hopefully that we can continue the conversation so that you need to know we need real policy change and reform that will cause the police officer to really think about what they're doing before they...
Thank you. Thank you for coming down. Next speaker, please identify yourself.
Irena Martin with Black Lives Matter.
I got you.
Okay, we're going to start off with Daryl Gates. Okay, we're going to start off with Rodney King. We're also going to talk about Bratton going to New York and them running him out. We're also going to talk about Waukesha Wilson. Was it 86 minutes of a video and 22 minutes is missing? That's why I oppose Measure C for many of hashtags that I don't want to call hashtags, lost lives. And you want to continue to play games? It's not a joke. You guys spent many hours coming up with Measure C, grinning, skinning and grinning, playing games with people. It's not a joke. And if you care anything about it, which you don't, because this is just a charade, a game. You could blow smoke up somebody else's ass. We're coming for you. That's not a threat, but we're coming.
All right. That's fine. That's fine. Mr. Johnson?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
Good evening, Council. My name is Gilbert Johnson with Community Coalition, and I'm a lifelong resident of South Central, now known as South LA. I grew up in a home where my grandmother, who was a strong black activist from Oakland, California, told me very frequently, you better be good and watch out for them police, because you know they're out to get you, black man. This type of ideology stems from the long history of violence and brutality experienced by people of color across the nation. And here we are 25 years after the civil unrest and 52 years after the 65 Watts Rebellion, still talking about how to hold our police accountable when situations of misconduct are very present and prevalent in our communities. One of the South LA leaders that couldn't be here today asked me to share this quote with you, and I quote, "It's a horrible feeling, feeling like we have no protection from our so-called paid protectors because officers charged with misconduct are continuously let off the hook." No on Measure C.
Thank you. So if I could get, I think it's Princess Berry and Kiyama Bryant. Please come forward. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Alexis Ortiz. I'm a community organizer with Community Coalition. I'm here to let you know that we, the community, do not approve of Measure C, right? This is not satisfactory. We want real policy change and reform rooted in community-based solutions. We want police to think twice before they abuse the power that we, the community, give them. Think twice before they commit injustice and misconduct with our tax dollars. Why don't we think about prevention, right? You're talking about body cameras. Body cameras will only provide evidence to things that we as a community already know exist from experience. I personally do not need videos hanging on my timeline the way that lynch mobs left bodies of black people hanging in trees to send messages of who has the power to get away with misconduct and murder. Officers charged with misconduct do not deserve paid administrative leave. You should take that away. Take away their benefits when they're accused of misconduct and charged with misconduct. Pay restitutions to rectify their crimes against our community. The current systems do not work, and they do not cut it. The community is not behind it. Where is the investigation into the real systemic flaws that fail to hold police accountable when they are charged with misconduct? Where is the policy that is going to put an end to police thinking that they can abuse our community without real consequences?
Wrap it up. Thank you. Next speaker. Identify.
Hi, my name is Princess Berry. I'm a junior in high school, and I'm with Community Coalition.
Good.
And I'm not at age to vote yet, but as a youth, I think it's important for our voice to be heard. And with that voice, I'm saying to vote no on C. I can't worry about my future being at stake because we made a bad decision on voting yes on C. I don't want to end up being the next Mike Brown. I want to be the next Mae Jameson. I don't want to worry about being the next hashtag and not getting justice for something a cop did to me. I want to make a difference. I want to make history in a good way, not bad. And C doesn't make me safer.
Thank you. Okay, also, I'm looking for an Ariana Alcaraz and Melanie McNeil. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kiyama Bryant, and I am a member of LA Can. I'm a lone lifer here, too, in Los Angeles, California. And I just want to say I have nieces and nephews that are of color, right? So I'm very concerned for them because every time I turn on the news, right, all I see is police killings. It's sickening. Okay, and I'm really tired. Okay, so this is what I have to say to you guys. LAPD job description is what? To protect and serve all residents of Los Angeles, California, not to kill people that don't deserve death and leave families confused, tears for months and years, while LAPD officers are free and still killing humans, adults, children, and babies. Yet they drive around in million-dollar cars, and I feel like it's a mafia gang, right? That they're basically here to off the blacks and the Hispanics. That's how I feel, okay? Now, basically, if I kill an officer, right, I'm going to get life in jail, right? They're going to throw me in the pen. I'm going to eat sandwiches with no cheese and no mayonnaise, right? So I don't need a mic, okay? So basically, this must stop, okay? And I'm down for no on C. And I'm going to make sure my whole community stands for no.
Thank you for coming out. So if I could get the next speaker, and I think I'm also looking for a Trudy Goodwin or Tridy Goodwin, Ariana Alcaraz, Melanie McNeil. I think it's an Aiken Ababal Bell. Yes, identify yourself.
Good evening. My name is Melanie McNeil. I'm a member of the Church Without Walls. I'm also a mother of twin 15-year-old boys. And being a mother, you learn that it's out of love that you discipline your children. So I wanted to bring to acknowledge that it's an irony that for our current administration for this country and for this city to want to discipline the people by bringing in more police, and yet don't want to discipline the police that behave badly. So it's a matter of love. If you love a child, you discipline that child. If you love your people, you discipline your people. But you can't discipline and then spoil those who are bad. It just goes against what we're trying to do as a community. If we allow the police to get away with things that they're not supposed to do, what kind of example are you giving the community that you're supposed to be policing? You can't do that. It just goes against the whole sense of community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming. Next, identify yourself, please.
My name is Ariana Alcaraz. I'm a member of the Los Angeles Community Action Network, and I'm feeling very emotional right now because as we were waiting for this meeting to start, I was reading about the $81 million that was paid over the last year in legal settlements on behalf of the LAPD. And I want to say that in my work, I cannot, especially in this past year, not a day has gone by that we get a phone call or somebody coming into our office looking for help in paying their rent or on the brink of homelessness. And it is so hard to have to tell people that unfortunately there are absolutely no resources that our city can provide to you because we have, and this is as police officers are passing by on horses and driving down the street every 2 minutes, and it is so hard to have these conversations and let them know and come to the realization with them that we have a city council that coddles our police department and continuously gives them everything that they want. Money. They wanted $57 million for body cameras, and we can't even see them. They want to hire more police officers. You go ahead and you greenlight their budget, their increases in their budget every year. You are not realized, and you do realize this, but you continuously do it, and you continuously ignore people and the needs for housing and other things that make our community safer.
Thank you. Next speaker, please identify yourself.
Okay, so I'm known for keeping it real because
And your name again? I didn't hear you.
Trudy Goodwin.
Gotcha. Yes, ma'am.
I live in South Central. That's where my home has been since the 60s. And I just want to know two questions. One, why are we here today? Not why weren't we here in 2015, but why are we here today after the decision has already been made to put this measure on the ballot that ain't going to do nothing but bring more grief to my community? Paul Koretz, I worked with you in the city of West Hollywood. You know damn well you would not have brought this before the people in West Hollywood and tell them that this is the best way for the police department to govern them. You would have been run out of town. These are the same people who you told they bet not put anybody on the ground when they did a police stop. There was a law in West Hollywood that prevented you from putting people on the side.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker, and if I could get Yvonne Michelle Autry. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Kinola Adabali. I am a member of South
I butchered your name. I apologize for that.
Yes,
Go
sir.
ahead.
Yes, sir. I have grown up in South LA. I just believe that our community has been conditioned to fear the police department. Not only fear, we can't even give a friendly hello. I've been told many of times don't stare a cop in the eye because they get suspicious. My uncle has been a sheriff for over 30 years. I wanted to follow in his footsteps, but was it to serve and protect, or was it to break somebody's neck? I feel that this is just all types of level of messed up, just because imagine citizens being able to administer or appoint a judge for their disciplinary actions. What would the city be in? Chaos. I use air quotes because that's all I can use today. They should not be allowed to choose who disciplines them. The community should. We are taxpayers. We should be allowed to determine who is over us. You guys are for the people, then be for the
Thanks, Aiken. Miss Autry, are you still here?
Yes, I was beginning to think you had forgotten about
I
me.
had not.
Thank you. Yes, we are so grateful to have this opportunity to address you, but the issue is, what are you going to do about this? You are making war on our community, and I'm surprised at you. I had defended you to my friend Hermie, who continues to berate you. You are, I believe, of Jewish descent. You know that the Nazi police officers were commissioned and rewarded as mercenaries in the attack on your ancestors. So how can you stand here in good spirit and consciousness and wage the same war against black people, people of color, and people that are economically challenged in this community? These police officers are no doubt being rewarded for the extermination and the marginalization of black people, people of color, that you do not want to see here in your regentrification process. You are rewarding mercenary terrorist police officers who are criminals to exterminate the innocent. And that is what this is about. This is in preparation for the New World Order, as you scapegoat and you sacrifice these innocent people. And we will not stand for it. You stand in judgment before God and the community.
Thank you, Miss Autry. Thank you. So, if I could get your attention, I want to thank the panel for what I think you really put a lot of thought into all of your responses, recommendations, suggestions. You gave up valuable time, and that's appreciated. This, again, is not the last. This is the beginning. We have a lot of work to do, and we just have to figure out the best way to proceed. But the one thing that I know, as long as we are having a genuine conversation, then I think anything is possible. But I want to thank all of you in the audience for coming. Everybody that put in a card was given an opportunity to speak. You guys were given more than 2 minutes, and you'll be given more than 2 minutes again. And I learned a lot. I'm sure my other colleagues learned a lot. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.